am the Earth Science Manager for the Jurassic Coast team, and that means that I am basically in charge of the rocks. And all I'm going to already talk about are the two core areas of my work, which are to do with looking after and protecting the site. But just to start with, a very, very quick rundown of why we've got the World Heritage status. This is the criteria under the UNESCO Convention that we've proved our case, a site being an outstanding example of major stages in the Earth's history, a record of life and significant ongoing geological or geomorphological processes. And what we have on our site, of course, is this fantastic walk through time with the dipping rocks, meaning that we have the oldest rocks, the Triassic in East Devon, moving through into the Jurassic, starting on the Dorset-Devon border, and Richard had a nice picture there just now, and eventually on into the Cretaceous of Purbeck. Obviously complicated a little bit by the unconformity, but you all know that anyway. And really, that is what's in UNESCO parlance our outstanding universal value, is this 185 million years of the Earth's history in 95 miles of coast. And it seems there is nowhere else in the world where you can see a virtually complete succession through the Mesozoic. And okay, we've gone very tacky, we've called it Jurassic Coast. I know it should be the Mesozoic coast, but you know, the Jurassic's the jam in the sandwich, and people understand Jurassic, whereas Mesozoic, they'd be going, Okay, and in terms of time, of course, what we have is the Triassic, Jurassic and Cretaceous, but we also have virtually a third of the evolution of life recorded in the fossils of the coastline. You know, the rise of the dinosaurs. We've got these very early ancient, strange Triassic reptiles and amphibians. We've got the beautiful marine reptiles in the Jurassic, more familiar sort of ammonites and starfish, crocodiles and dinosaur footprints. It's all there. And then the third element, going back to the UNESCO criteria, the geological processes, we have what has been described as a laboratory for the study of coastal processes. So superb landslides. This is Beer Head with the chalk, of course. The fabulous Chesil Beach and the Fleet Lagoon. Again, not unique, but on such a narrow piece of coastline to have such superb examples of those. And of course the Lulworth coast, where there's really nowhere better to demonstrate the relationship between the structure and the grain of the geology and how that leads to the evolution of bays and headlands. Absolutely classic stuff. And this coastline, of course, is maintained by erosion. If it wasn't eroding, it would be as dull as Somerset. That's quite new, that one. It's working very, very well, especially for people who come from Somerset. And it's geologically absolutely true, isn't it? So landslides, these are the sort of things that Lyme, of course, is famous for. And yeah, it's the dynamic nature of the coastline that makes it such an exciting place. This is the view towards Blackven in March 2008, and then in May 2008, in fact, May the 6th, we had this massive great collapse. Do you want to see that again? I mean, when the weather forecast says, you know, there's a risk of structural damage and flooding, that's, you know, music to our ears, of course. But it is extraordinary. This is how the media read that story. Landslide destroys 300 meters of the World Heritage Site. I mean, it shows a fundamental misunderstanding of the nature of our site. And I would say that more than 95% of the population make no connection between erosion and the site being what it is. They don't understand that Golden Cap is a product of erosion. And every time there is a landslide or a storm, the reaction is, isn't it terrible? Can't we do something about it? In fact, the other day I had somebody whose favourite area is up here in the Spittles saying we needed to stop the erosion. And I kept saying, well, it's only as it is because it's eroding. But can't you plant trees there and stop it? So it's really our major conservation message, is to get over this idea that erosion is a natural process. It's the reason why this coast isn't just important for geology, but why the beaches are there, why the people want to walk and enjoy the coast, you know, the whole shooting match. But of course there is a conflict, because many of the towns are perched on that coast as well. And I'm glad we've been talking about sea level change. In this picture of Lyme Regis, you can actually see the shoreline and the cliff line from 125,000 years ago, the previous interglacial with higher sea levels, and it's through there. And it's extraordinary to think that in 1924 you could take a bus through here, through Blackven, and this is all stable. That landslide complex has been stable for 125,000 years, and it's been reactivated in a human lifetime, which is extraordinary, because us geologists, again, we're always thinking about geological processes in certainly millions of years, and yet it's happening here. So what happened was the ice sheets formed for the last time, the sea levels dropped, taking the erosion away meant that those landslides just slumped out across the dried up seabed. So these fields up here, the spittles, are a remnant of that. I'm colourblind, I can hardly see that. Are a remnant of that ancient landslide slope. And the sea, of course, has come back in and is reactivating these landslides. And again, in the middle part of Lyme Regis and heading out towards the undercliff, it's again, you can see these arc-shaped breaks in the slope. This is the shoreline from 125,000 years ago. The engineers, when they first looked at Lyme, they thought the only problem was the sea bashing the seafront, causing erosion to the land, to the base. And then they realized if the seafront failed, it could actually reactivate these landslides through the town. So we have some very good engineering solutions. The latest one now, though, is looking at the eastern side of Lyme Regis, again by the spittles. So that picture of the big landslide was taken just here, looking east. And the concern is that this whole slope is actually an ancient failed landslide surface. And here's the geomorphological interpretation along with the geology underneath it. And so the concern is that this entire area is at risk of sudden and catastrophic reactivation. Up to 160 houses, the main road through Lyme Regis, the church, the football field, the car park, the allotments. You know, a lot of people invest a lot of time in their soil, don't they, out there? And there is, of course, a direct conflict because here is our World Heritage Site, our fantastic geology, the fossils, the geomorphology, also the wildlife. It's a special area of conservation for wildlife too. So there's really quite a conflict. And the concern the engineers have is that the old sea wall built on the east side of the town, built in 1953, is now showing signs of distress. And that means, in common terms, it's knackered. It was built without even a foundation. There is no foundation underneath this seawall. That's the chimney breast of a house just there that slipped over in the 70s. So the engineers with this is West Dorset, with their consultants, their preferred option was to build a new seawall and put rock armour for about 380 metres along the eastern flank of Lyme and along to Church Cliff. And I was able to persuade them, and it wasn't just me, lots of people said, we don't want the eastern flank of Lyme completely covered in rock armour. So we were able to argue that if the old seawall was built without any foundations, surely you can build a new seawall pretty much on the footprint of the old one. And that's what what is going for this scheme now. So we accept that there can be change. This World Heritage Site was designated with all of these conflicts already in place. And it's it's a matter of trying to find solutions. And in fact, there could be fantastic opportunities here in terms of the marine reptiles and fish that could be uncovered in the foundations. And if I had one regret, I mean, I worked out if they'd built the rock armour, if they'd gone for this scheme, they would have dug up about 2,000 square metres of the blue lias. But this is the right balance, in my view. In contrast, over at Sidmouth, Pennington Point, there are real concerns. It doesn't look like there's very much change, but the erosion rates have increased quite significantly on this part of the site. And more recently, the residents of the houses above have actually put in their own planning application to put 240 metres of rock armour along the middle part of the beach there to protect the cliffs and to make it safer for the public. And we had no option but to object to that. And in fact, the applicant has withdrawn his application. And we're currently working with the Environment Agency on some kind of beach management plan that will maintain the beach at a higher level than it sometimes is at the moment, but without actually having a substantial impact. It'll mean that if you want to look for Triassic reptiles on these ledges, it will become more difficult. But again, it's a balance we have to try and strike. So it's interesting, when engineers talk about protecting the coast, they're talking about protecting it from erosion, whereas when we're talking about protecting the coast, we're talking about protecting it from coast protection schemes. And the long-term plan, or even not that long-term, is that things are going to change. This sea defence at Charmouth was built in the early 1990s by 2024 there will be no more policy support to maintain it. And we will actually see this seawall start to fail and the properties and buildings changing. And that in one way is going to benefit the World Heritage Site enormously. But we also have concerns about the access and the facilities. I mean, our Charmouth Heritage Coast Centre is located just there. It's a premier interpretation site for the fossils. So another project which I haven't really got time to talk about is looking at how we adapt to climate change and to the inevitable loss of features and facilities along the coast. And that's happening right now. And just one other point, I mean, this massive great scheme at Dalston Bay and Swanage, that wouldn't happen today. The funding for coast defence schemes is so much tighter. This scheme cost nearly as much as the property that it sought to defend. So that was a failure to protect that site back in the 80s, but things have changed. And in fact, we have a much more mature relationship with the engineers now. We all work and meet together, and it's a much better place to be. And of course, in reality, it is about balancing the natural and human aspects of this coast together. That's what the planning system aims to do. And it's really interesting. The government has signed the UNESCO Convention to protect this World Heritage Site for the benefit of all mankind, but our protection system is the planning system, and that is a democratic system. And I'm happy with that. I mean, we argue our cases where we've got absolute grounds to, and we compromise and work where we can. And that's the way we should do things. And otherwise, I'd be the most important person on the coastline. And I'm not really. Okay, then the second element is the fossils and fossil collecting. I mean, it's really interesting. I became a geologist just next to that rock in 1973. I found my first little pyrite ammonite, and that was it. You know, I was absolutely grabbed. And since then, literally millions of people must have been down there collecting fossils. And of course, they're still finding them, except that the weather at the moment is absolutely awful, when it has been for weeks. It'll be hard to find things. And the centre at Charmouth is just in the background there, takes all these kids out, and hopefully we're making new geologists and paleontologists all the time. And of course, it's a completely sustainable activity because between Charmouth and Lyme Regis, the landslides are so massive they generate millions of fossils onto the beaches. But also, the lower Lias is the richest source of lower Jurassic reptiles, fish and insects anywhere in the world. And the Geological Conservation Review tells us that. Incredible fossils that are being found. And they're being found, of course, because of these fantastic storms. I mean, I just love it when it's like that. I mean, you can see why we have to think about moving the centre. That's a currently defended site. And of course, the fossil collectors have largely moved down here because they know if you want to find the fossils, you need to be at that point, at that time, when that storm happens. And if only we knew when the storms were going to happen, months ahead, we could put them in our diary and we could all be down there. But if you wanted to find a beautiful Asteroceros, there are actually only a few hours in the year when the storms create that opportunity to uncover the flat stones and wash them onto the beach. And there is a lot of competition. There are a lot of people out there looking who are able to be on the spot down there. There are also the fantastic pyrite ammonites. That's just part of a collection that was gathered in a couple of hours in that 2007 storm. And here they are, a right bunch of reprobates, the local collectors, mostly with OCD of some sort or other, fairly passionate about their fossils too. And you might know one or two of them. And here are some of the things they found. This is a guy called Chris Moore with an ichthyosaur. Chris McGowan has seen this and thinks that that's something new to science. An ichthyosaur from Seatown. The important thing is that half of it's missing. I mean, it was actually washed away before Chris could be bothered to go down there and actually find it. Same with this incredible fish found by a couple called Keith and Mary from Liverpool, of all places. Wander down onto our beaches, and it's a huge fish, it's about this size. But of course, the dorsal part of the body was being washed away because, of course, you can't find these things until they start to become exposed to erosion. This is the scale here is about 40 centimetres. This is a GP called Karen who found this. She said, I think we found an eel. But of course there weren't any eels around. She cleaned it very carefully, and it's this shark, Palaeosphynax, although I believe that name has been changed again now. It's very difficult for us in the West Country to keep up, with you lot up here in the city, changing names all the time. But I'm told this is far better than the type specimen in the Natural History Museum. But the algae on it, the algal growth here, suggests that that was lying on the ledges for at least 6 months, possibly longer in fact. And you can see that it has actually been partly washed away by the sea. Now Karen is going to donate that to the Natural History Museum, but at a time of her choosing, which I think will be her death, which hopefully for her will be a long time in the future. But if you're interested in Palaeosphynax, then that's a bit of an issue, isn't it? But at least it's been found. And of course, perhaps most famous of all is Scelidosaurus, the Charmouth dinosaur. This was found by Dave Soul about 10 years ago in a landslide. He found one piece and went back every day for the next 4 months and recovered all of those pieces, cleaned and acid prepared. And it's much better than the one in the Natural History Museum. Oh, Martin's gone. Oh no, he's there. He's there. And Dave has said that he wants to see that go into a world-class museum in Charmouth or Lyme Regis, and in fact quite a few of the collectors do. Just to bring you right up to date though, this is the weird fish. It was found last September, October sort of time. I mean, we're pretty sure it's a fish, but this bit is causing some real confusion. And if anyone's got any idea what on earth it is, let us know. It's not a jaw. There are dozens of these V-shaped, V-cross-sectioned pieces of very black, bony material. The closest we've got so far is some kind of chondrostrian coelacanth type fish, but I'm pretty certain that is going to be something new to science. And it was found by 3 collectors. They're going to donate it. It's in my garage, and we just need to clean it and get it studied. And it's big. It's actually about 1.5 meters, these 2 blocks. And despite the collecting efforts, quite a lot of it's been lost. Those 2 bits that were cleaned by Chris Andrew belonged somewhere in those missing pieces, and there's no sign of the rest. So it's a rapidly eroding site, and we need collecting effort. And the result of that is that these amazing and important things for which the coast is designated are rescued just in the nick of time, despite the fact that there is quite a high collecting effort, or very high collecting effort. And there couldn't be a better example of that than the enormous Pliosaur skull found down in Weymouth Bay. I can't tell you where it was exactly. No, it's being recorded, isn't it? Somewhere near Weymouth. And it's found by this guy called Kevin Sheehan. Again, the same sort of story. He found 3 lumps of the jaw on one day on a walk on the beach, and then went back for the next 5 years, every time it rained, every time there was rough weather, and recovered virtually all of it. He only missed 3 small pieces, which is an incredible effort. And there's a group from, being led by Mike Benton at Bristol, who are looking at the description of this. I only have one condition. If it's something new to science, it's got to have Kevin or Sheehan or both in the name. That's the only condition. And it's also been through Southampton University's CT scanner, which was very nice of them. They phoned me up and said, we've got a brand new £2 million scanner. Would you like us to put your Pliosaur through it? And I went, oh, okay, yes, please. That'd be lovely. And I've just seen some results of the analysis from Bristol. And there are some amazing detail of the internal structures in there, which is great. And that was funded by the Heritage Lottery Fund, which is really good. But it also helps us very much in our role, in helping to determine our role in terms of research. And it's looking, one of the really key parts is to be that conduit between collector and museum to target and acquire these really important specimens. But we have a code of conduct in West Dorset because of such an interest, such a collecting effort, such scientific interest, and the commercial value of the fossils as well. And our view is that collectors are an essential part of the management. They've demonstrated their role over 200 years, regardless of whether they're commercial or amateur. I mean, Mary Anning was a commercial collector, and she's regarded by most as one of the most famous fossilists of all time. There is an alternative interpretation that she was a money-grabbing, motivated by money, by a personal financial gain only person. That's possible, it's a view. But our view is that collectors play an important role. At the same time, of course, there is the academic interest, which often involves access to the in situ material. So our code has to try and balance those together. And the core of it is very simple. We want the fossils to be recovered rather than destroyed by the sea. We want everyone to have access to what's being found, and we want the UK accredited museums to have the first opportunity to acquire these things should they be offered for sale or donation. And the requirements of the code in terms of the collectors are also very simple. We require collectors not to dig in situ. So in situ is essentially reserved entirely for stratigraphic study. And I'm very glad to say that Tim Ewan from the Natural History Museum was out on Black Fen a week ago, actually looking and collecting in situ in some of the most interesting beds, because our requirement means that collectors aren't doing that, and you can access it from a scientific point of view. There is a little offset there. Obviously, if you find something that's about to be washed away by the sea, you get it out. And it's pretty sort of self-regulatory. By definition, it's going to be a small, no impact excavation. We have an 8-metre ichthyosaur in the cliff at Monmouth Beach. We've had 2 years of pondering and wondering, what are we going to do? Should we take a 13-ton HIMAC down there and dig it out? Or is the site maintained by natural processes? Is that the wrong thing to do? Yeah, tricky stuff. Yeah, that's the other part of it, of course. We want the specimens recorded and offered to the museums in the first instance. So it's simple, just like me. And we've reviewed the codes just over the last year or so. We went to what I'd say was a wide consultation. We had a pretty limited response, only 32 responses. The majority of those are supportive, and most of them contain really useful comments. The most common one is the quality of the records is very poor, the accessibility of the records are very poor. So we're going to work on that. And we had 4 quite critical responses, 3 from geoconservation groups. So all I'm going to do is, just in the last 5 minutes, is focus on the first question, which is the core one, and particularly our role in terms of global thinking. So in terms of that question, are our priorities right? We had a pretty clear majority view they were, but we had 4 expressing concern, and particularly that our approach is very much out of line with global thinking. And being a UNESCO World Heritage Site, our ambition is to be an exemplar of good management. That's obviously quite a concern. But if we look at some of these things, the real concern centred around this idea of loss, that museums, the specimens were being lost. And if you look at the UNESCO Convention, it's the deterioration or disappearance of any item of cultural or natural heritage. But our priority is that we want the fossils to be rescued from certain and total loss from the sea by collectors. They're not lost because they're recorded in the fossil recording scheme, and eventually many of them will find their way to museums sooner or later. But there's a fossil fish, a Dipedium, destroyed in the big storm in December. Tragic. The Council of Europe was also put forward, particularly these appendices. So management must be appropriate to the scientific interest and the physical nature of the site, and approaches should reflect legal systems, cultural approaches to protection, the physical differences to a site, which is key, etc. Traditional rights and activities. I mean, we could argue that it is a traditional right or activity. We're not going to. We don't need to. The other one, the Global Geoparks, or the European Geopark Charter, that we're very much out of line with that. But the Geopark Charter sits within the Global Charter, and half of that spent its time discussing where collecting fossils may be tolerable, and even where trade might be acceptable. So we don't see any issue with that whatsoever. And finally, the Pro-Geo Protocol, which was just recently published, again has a great discussion about where it might be acceptable to be able to collect fossils. It says the sale of common fossils or minerals may be allowed. Obviously, we also allow the sale of important specimens, scientifically important specimens, but that really reflects the time and the effort that's required to find and conserve and prepare them. Now, this huge ichthyosaur, about 3.5 meters long, there's 120 hours of preparation there so far, and probably another 300 to go. And then finally, the Scottish Fossil Code, we were pointed as this as being a very good example of how to do it, but we had in our consultation 2 responses from the committee that drew it up saying that our approach is entirely compatible with the Scottish Fossil Code. So I just have to shrug my shoulders there. And I'm not really sure where we're going to go with that any further. So the only other areas, a more restrictive approach is being suggested to us. But how would we provide the high level of collecting effort that's clearly needed to rescue the fossils? And how would we police a coastline that's from Burton Bradstock to Lyme Regis? I mean, there are no powers to stop or search or eject anyone. I mean, what's in your rucksack? Where have you been? And I want you to leave the site now. There will never be any law that will be passed in this country that will give me the power to do that. It's an open site. You can't control the access. The other questions, there they are. We're looking at site condition, the barriers to acquisition, alternative approaches, the quality of the records, and awareness. I haven't got time to dip into those today at all. But the outcome is that we're going to maintain the code pretty much as it is, but we're going to work to improve particularly the quality of the records. And we're looking actually at an online database which will make things a lot better, I hope. But if you want to read the results of that, it's on our website at jurassiccoast.com or .org. And I would urge you to have a look, because it's a really interesting discussion and range of views that are being put forward. I mean, we don't claim this code is perfect, but we do believe it's the best way to manage the site. And literally on that note, just to finish, sites where fossils come from vary enormously in their sensitivity collecting. It's pretty obvious, isn't it? There are exposure sites where the resource is essentially completely sustainable, and there are finite sites where the resource is very finite. And obviously, those sites will vary in their response to collecting. The exposure sites are robust, the finite sites are sensitive. And obviously, our coastline sits right there. It's at the most extreme of the exposure sites, completely different from, say, a cave deposit, where you go in there, dig up the sediments, it's gone forever. And naturally, I would say that the management should really reflect that. There's no one size fits all. The management a river or an inland outcrop, they may slide up and down that side in terms of their sensitivity. So the management needs to actually tailor to those sites. And that's why, for instance, in West Dorset, we have open access on the coast because we can't police and stop this beach. We can't provide the collecting effort. We need the collectors to be out there collecting. But in nearby Horn Park Quarry, we put a fence around it because it's a disused quarry. It's a finite reserve. We want to expose the beds and interpret them. But if it was open, people would still come in and collect. Not necessarily commercial collectors, but I had somebody from a bed and breakfast who said, oh yes, we had some Germans over and they went to Horn Park Quarry and had a lovely time. They came back with a boot full of fossils. That's the nature of the beast. You've got to tailor the site. And that's a paper that we haven't published between ourselves, Natural England and JNCC. But again, it's on geoconservation.org, and I again urge you to read it. So thank you very much. That's the end.